Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Robert. Here is what happened when I decided to watch the video clips from the hidden cameras I installed without telling my wife. What I saw scattered everything I once believed about love and marriage. When I met Lana, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, saving money to take classes in early childhood education. She was kind, patient, and had a warmth that reminded me of my mother's best qualities. Lana seemed to appreciate my dedication to building a stable future, and she understood that my drive to succeed came from a place of love rather than ambition. We dated for years before I proposed. By then, I had been promoted twice and was earning enough to support both of us comfortably. Lana had been talking about wanting to be a stay-at-home mother someday, and I loved the idea of being able to provide that option for her. My own mother had never had the luxury of choosing between work and family. She had needed both jobs just to pay rent and buy groceries. The early years of our marriage felt like everything I had hoped for. We bought a small house in a decent neighborhood, and I threw myself into work with the goal of providing Lana with security and comfort. I typically worked 50 to 60 hours a week, but I made sure that when I was home, I was fully present. We had dinner together most nights and spent time together. The memory that shaped everything about how I approach family and relationships happened when I was 8 years old. My father walked out of my life, leaving behind a note on the kitchen counter explaining that the financial pressure was too much, that he couldn't handle being responsible for supporting a family when every month felt like drowning. My mother found that note when she came back from dropping me off at school. By the time I got home that afternoon, she had already started making plans for our survival. She never said a bad word about my father in front of me, never used me as a weapon in whatever anger or hurt she was feeling. Instead, she simply got to work. She took on multiple jobs to keep us afloat. I spent a lot of time with babysitters and at after-school programs, but when my mother was home, she was completely present. Watching my mother work herself to exhaustion to keep our small family together made me understand something fundamental about responsibility. She never complained, never made me feel like a burden, never suggested that life would be easier if she didn't have to take care of me. She just did what needed to be done, day after day, year after year. Somewhere during those difficult years, I made myself a promise. If I were ever fortunate enough to have a family of my own, I would never abandon them the way my father had abandoned us. I would work as hard as necessary to provide stability and security, and I would never let the people I loved feel the kind of uncertainty and fear that had defined my childhood. This promise became the driving force behind everything I did. I worked hard in school, not because I was naturally academic, but because I understood that education was the path to better opportunities at that time. I took a job at 16, saving every dollar I could for community college. After graduation, I found work as a junior financial advisor and slowly built a career that could support the kind of life I had dreamed of providing for a family. When my wife, Lana, got pregnant, we were both thrilled. We had been married for 3 years at that point and felt ready to start a family. Lana suggested quitting her job to focus entirely on being a mother, and I supported the decision wholeheartedly. This was exactly what I had worked toward, being able to provide well enough that my wife could choose to dedicate herself to raising our child. I increased my work hours to compensate for the loss of Lana's income, but it felt worthwhile. When Connor was born, healthy and perfect, I felt like I had successfully kept the promise I had made to myself as a child. I was providing for my family in a way my father had never been able to provide for us. The next few years seemed almost too good to be true. Lana adapted beautifully to motherhood, and Connor was a happy, healthy child who reached all his developmental milestones on schedule. We were able to upgrade to a larger house in a better neighborhood when Connor turned 2. Lana seemed genuinely content with our life as a stay-at-home mother. She never complained about my work schedule or made me feel guilty for the long hours I was putting in to maintain our lifestyle. I felt incredibly blessed during this period. Lana seemed to understand that my dedication to work was motivated by love for our family rather than a desire to avoid domestic responsibilities. When I was home, I was fully engaged, playing with Connor, helping with bedtime routines, taking care of household tasks that Lana couldn't manage with a young child. By the time Connor turned 4, he was attending preschool 3 days a week, which gave Lana some time to herself while I was at work. She used this time for grocery shopping, appointments, and the occasional lunch with friends. Our routine felt comfortable and sustainable, and I believed we had achieved the kind of family stability I had always wanted to provide. The first disruption to our peaceful life came in the form of neighborhood crime reports. Over the course of 6 weeks, there had been 4 break-ins within a 3-block radius of our house. The pattern seemed to be daytime entries when homeowners were at work, with thieves targeting electronics, jewelry, and small valuables that could be quickly removed. Our neighborhood had always felt safe, which was one of the reasons we had chosen to move there when Connor was born. The idea of our home being vulnerable while I was at work concerned me, particularly because Lana was often there alone. Even though she was home most of the time, she did run errands, take Connor to the park, or visit with friends, leaving the house empty for hours at a stretch. At the community meeting organized to discuss the break-ins, several neighbors mentioned installing security systems or cameras. The police officer who spoke to the group recommended visible deterrents, like security company signs and motion-activated lights, but also suggested that hidden cameras could be valuable for identification if a break-in did occur. I spent the following week researching security camera systems that would be appropriate for our needs. I didn't want something overly complicated or expensive, just basic coverage that would provide peace of mind. I settled on a wireless system with 4 cameras that could be monitored remotely through a smartphone app and stored footage on internal memory cards. The installation was straightforward enough that I could handle it myself over a weekend. I placed 1 camera covering the front door approach, another watching the backyard, and 2 interior cameras with views of the living room and kitchen area. These locations would capture anyone entering the house, while still respecting our family's privacy in bedrooms and bathrooms. Lana had taken Connor to visit her parents that weekend, so I was able to complete the installation without interruption. I tested each camera through the app, confirmed that the footage quality was clear, and verified that the motion detection settings were working properly. The system seemed to be functioning exactly as intended. In my focus on getting the cameras installed and operational, I forgot to mention the system to Lana when she and Connor returned home. It wasn't a deliberate omission. I simply had other things on my mind, and since the cameras were for our family's protection, it didn't occur to me that discussing them was urgent. The cameras were small and positioned discreetly, so they weren't immediately noticeable unless you were specifically looking for them. Over the next months, I once in a while checked the live camera feeds through the app, and there were never any security incidents that required my attention. The break-ins in our neighborhood had stopped after that meeting, probably because the increased security measures and police patrols had deterred whatever opportunistic criminals had been operating in the area. Because there had been no security problems, I stopped regularly monitoring the camera system. The app would send notifications if motion was detected, but since Lana and Connor were home most days, these alerts were constant and not particularly useful. I began ignoring the notifications, trusting that the system was working in the background and storing footage in case it was ever needed. On a Friday afternoon, about 8 months after the camera installation, I received a different kind of notification from the camera app. The internal storage was nearly full, and the system would begin automatically deleting the oldest footage within 48 hours to make room for new recordings. The app suggested reviewing and saving any important footage before the automatic deletion occurred. I planned to spend some time that weekend going through the stored footage, partly to free up storage space and partly out of curiosity about what 6 months of our daily life looked like from the camera's perspective. I was actually looking forward to seeing moments I had missed while at work, Connor playing, Lana going about her daily routines, maybe some interactions between them that would be worth saving as family memories. Saturday morning, after Connor had finished his breakfast and was occupied with toys in his playroom, I settled in my home office with my laptop to review the camera footage. The system had stored hundreds of hours of video, organized by date and camera location. I decided to start by skipping through recent footage at high speed, looking for anything interesting or worth preserving. The first hour of review was exactly what I had expected. Lana was moving through her daily routines, Connor was playing, and a normal domestic life was happening while I was at work. There were clips of Lana doing housework, preparing meals, helping Connor with activities, and taking him outside to play in the backyard. It was pleasant to see these moments I typically missed, and I found myself smiling at Connor's enthusiasm for everything he did. But as I continued through the footage, something began to bother me. There was a silver Honda Accord that appeared in several clips, always parked in our driveway during afternoon hours. At first, I assumed this was a delivery vehicle or perhaps a friend of Lana's that I hadn't met. But the car appeared frequently, several times a week, and always during the same time period, typically between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. I began paying closer attention to the clips that included this silver Honda. A man would get out of the car, always the same person. He seemed comfortable approaching our house, like someone who had been there many times before. What struck me as odd was how Lana greeted this man. Even from the limited view the front door camera provided, I could see that their interaction seemed familiar and warm. They would embrace briefly before going inside together, and Lana's body language suggested this was someone she was happy to see rather than a contractor or service provider. I switched to reviewing the interior camera footage from the same dates and times. What I found made me stop the video player and sit back in my chair, trying to process what I was seeing. Lana and this man, whom I would later learn was Ryan, were clearly involved in a romantic relationship. The interior cameras captured them in intimate situations that went far beyond friendship or casual acquaintance. They were physically affectionate in ways that Lana and I hadn't been in a while. I forced myself to continue watching, even though each clip felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a single incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was an ongoing affair that had been happening in my house, in my absence, for months. The footage showed this man's visits occurring 2 or 3 times a week, always during the window, when I was at work and Connor was at school. The most devastating aspect of what I was seeing wasn't just the betrayal, but the realization of how much effort and planning had gone into deceiving me. Lana had clearly arranged her schedule around these visits, timing them perfectly to avoid detection. She had maintained a completely normal relationship with me at home while conducting this intense affair during the day. As I continued through other footage, I discovered that on several occasions when her lover visited and our child had been home instead of at preschool, Lana would lock Connor in his bedroom so she could be alone with her lover. The interior camera captured this several times while Lana was distracted in the living room. There were also instances where Lana had delayed picking Connor up from preschool because her time with her affair partner had run longer than planned. I could see timestamps showing Connor should have been picked up at noon, but Lana wouldn't leave the house until after 1 o'clock, meaning our 4-year-old son was left waiting at school while his mother prioritized her affair. I stopped watching the footage at that point. The evidence of Lana's infidelity was overwhelming and undeniable, but discovering that Connor had been neglected and possibly traumatized as part of her deception was more than I could handle in the moment. I closed my laptop and sat in my office for nearly 2 hours, trying to process what I had learned about my wife and the life we had been living together. The questions that haunted me during those hours weren't just about Lana's betrayal, but about my own blindness to what had been happening. How had I missed the signs of such an extensive deception? Had Lana's contentment with our life been completely fabricated? What had I failed to provide that had led her to seek intimacy elsewhere? I thought about all the times Lana had seemed genuinely happy with our family life, all the conversations where she had expressed satisfaction with being a stay-at-home mother, all the moments when she had seemed loving and committed to our marriage. Had all of that been performance? Had she been planning or conducting this affair even during times when she seemed most connected to me and Connor? When I finally left my office and rejoined my family for the remainder of the weekend, I had to work hard to maintain a normal demeanor. Lana noticed that I seemed subdued during dinner, and she asked if everything was okay. I told her that I had received some concerning news about a client situation at work, which was a complete fabrication but seemed to satisfy her curiosity. Lana's complete lack of guilt or anxiety about her own deceptions was almost as disturbing as the affair itself. She showed no signs of internal conflict about the double life she had been leading. After dinner, she was affectionate with me in the same casual way she had been for months, seemingly unbothered by the fact that she had been intimate with another man just days before. Over the next several days, I found myself studying Lana's behavior for signs of the deception I now knew existed. What amazed me was how seamlessly she maintained the facade of our normal family life. She prepared meals, took care of Connor, managed household tasks, and interacted with me exactly as she had been doing for months. There was no indication whatsoever that she was conducting an affair or feeling any guilt about her betrayal. During this period of observation, I had to make some fundamental decisions about how to respond to what I had discovered. My first instinct was to confront Lana immediately, to demand an explanation, and try to understand how our marriage had deteriorated to this point without my awareness. But I realized that an emotional confrontation would likely result in denials, excuses, and attempts to minimize the seriousness of what had been happening. Instead, I forced myself to think strategically about what would be best for Connor. The footage I had seen showed clear evidence that he had been negatively affected by Lana's affair, locked in his room, left waiting at school, exposed to adult situations that were inappropriate for a 4-year-old. Any decision I made about our marriage needed to prioritize his well-being over my own emotional needs. I spent several sleepless nights considering whether our marriage could be salvaged. Lana had been conducting an affair for a long time, lying to me daily, and using our son as a prop in her deception. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was completely destroyed, and I couldn't imagine how it could be rebuilt. More importantly, I realized that Connor was being raised by a woman who was capable of elaborate and ongoing deception, who was willing to neglect his needs for her own gratification, and who was teaching him through her behavior that dishonesty was acceptable. As someone who was raised by a single mother with unshakable integrity, I couldn't accept the idea of Connor learning these lessons from Lana's example. After a week of agonizing consideration, I decided to end our marriage. This wasn't just about punishing Lana for her betrayal. It was about protecting Connor from being raised in an environment built on lies and ensuring that he had at least one parent who would model honesty and integrity. I began researching family law attorneys who specialized in divorce cases involving custody disputes. Based on online reviews and recommendations, I scheduled a consultation with an attorney with extensive experience in complex divorce proceedings. When I met with the attorney, I brought copies of the camera footage that documented Lana's affair. He reviewed the evidence carefully and explained that the footage was legally admissible and would be extremely valuable in both the divorce proceedings and custody determination. The combination of documented adultery and child neglect would likely result in a favorable custody arrangement and protection from alimony obligations. He recommended moving forward with divorce proceedings quickly, before Lana became aware of the evidence against her. Over the next 3 weeks, I maintained our normal family routine while the attorney prepared the divorce filing. This was one of the most difficult periods of my life, acting like a loving husband while knowing that our marriage was already over, interacting normally with Lana while knowing the extent of her deception, and preparing to disrupt Connor's life in a way that would initially be traumatic but was ultimately necessary for his long-term well-being. The cameras continued recording during this period, documenting additional evidence of Lana's ongoing affair. Her lover's visits continued at the same frequency, with the same casual intimacy that had characterized their relationship for months. Lana showed no signs of ending the affair or feeling guilty about her behavior. Finally, my attorney completed the divorce filing, and we scheduled the service of papers for a Tuesday morning when I would be at work and Connor would be at preschool. I wanted Lana to receive the documents privately, without Connor being present for what would likely be an emotional scene. When Lana called me at work after being served with the divorce papers, her reaction was exactly what I had expected: shock, anger, and denial. But when I told her about the camera footage, her tone changed completely. She realized that her affair had been documented in detail and that her attempts at denial would be futile. She now attempts to blame me for not being present enough in our marriage. The divorce proceedings took several months to complete, but the evidence I had gathered made the outcome largely predetermined. Lana's attorney attempted to negotiate a settlement that would provide her with alimony and significant time with Connor, but the footage of her affair and neglect of our son made such arrangements impossible to justify. Ultimately, I was granted primary custody of Connor, with Lana receiving supervised visitation rights initially. The court determined that her behavior had created an unstable environment for Connor, and that his interests would be best served by living primarily with me. Lana was required to complete parenting classes and counseling before her visitation could become unsupervised. The financial settlement was straightforward since we had a prenuptial agreement, and Lana's adultery eliminated any claim she might have had to ongoing support. She received her portion of our shared assets, but no alimony, and I retained the house and primary custody of Connor. In the months following the divorce, I reduced my work hours to focus on single parenting with the help of caregivers. Connor adjusted remarkably well to our new routine, and I realized that he was actually more relaxed and secure than he had been during the final months of the marriage. He no longer had to witness the tension that had existed between Lana and me, and he no longer experienced the neglect and confusion that had resulted from Lana's divided attention. Looking back now, I realize that the promise I made to myself as a child to never abandon my family the way my father had abandoned us had prepared me to handle this situation with Connor's best interests as my priority. Although my marriage had failed, I had succeeded in providing my son with stability and honest parenting during a difficult transition. The hidden cameras had revealed a truth that was painful but necessary to acknowledge. Sometimes protecting your family means making decisions that are difficult in the short term, but essential for long-term well-being. Lana's affair and neglect of Connor had made our family fundamentally unstable, regardless of how normal our life had appeared on the surface. Connor and I have built a new routine together that feels more authentic and peaceful than the final years of my marriage. While the divorce was painful, I know that I made the right choice for both of us. My son is learning what it means to live with integrity and honesty, values that will serve him well throughout his life. Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Frank. I lived with my wife, Amber, and her 3 sisters. That's 4 grown women under one roof. And for a while, I didn't complain as I handled every single financial responsibility without asking much in return. But as things got tight, I had to speak up. I told them to cut back on expenses if they expected me to continue covering the mortgage alone. I thought we could talk it through like adults. But instead, when I came back home that evening, the locks had been changed and all my things were packed up and left outside. That one moment changed everything. What happened after that was something they never saw coming. When I think back to how things started between Amber and me, I can't help but smile. We met in the most ordinary way. From that point on, we just clicked. Amber and I dated for almost 2 years before I proposed. In that time, we became each other's best friends. There was nothing forced between us. When I finally proposed, there was no doubt in her eyes. She hugged me so tightly. The wedding wasn't some grand affair. We didn't have the budget for all that, and honestly, we didn't care. It was small in a quiet outdoor space that Amber loved. She kept telling people, "This is the beginning of everything I've ever wanted." But I also knew reality would hit fast. Before the wedding, I was living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment. It wasn't exactly ideal for starting a family. There wasn't even space for home essentials. Amber never complained, but I knew she had dreams of raising our future kids in a home that felt warm, stable, and open. That stuck with me. So, I started planning. Long before we even set the wedding date, I began putting money aside quietly. I did it with one goal, a proper family home. I didn't tell Amber right away because I wanted it to be a surprise. But eventually, I found a house in a good neighborhood she'd mentioned. A few years into our marriage, Amber and I had had our share of ups and downs, like any couple, but we were doing okay. One evening, everything changed with a single phone call. Amber's parents had been in a car accident. They didn't make it. I still remember the sound she made when I told her. I held her for hours that night as she shook in my arms. And for the weeks that followed, I watched her fall apart in ways I never thought possible. She barely spoke. She barely ate. Just moved through the house like a shadow. That loss hit her like a train. She was her parents' firstborn with 3 younger sisters. After the funeral, it became clear they didn't really have anyone stable to go to. There were relatives in another state, but none they felt safe or close to. And I could see it in Amber's eyes. She wasn't going to let them scatter like that. She wanted them with us. She wanted to be their anchor now. Their big sister, their guardian, their everything. So we opened our home. No one forced it on me. I agreed without hesitation. I told her, if this is what you need, then we'll figure it out since it's temporary. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I believed in standing by your partner when the storms hit. That's what marriage meant to me. So her sisters moved in, and our quiet 2-person household became something bigger. I was working longer hours by then. Bills were higher, food disappeared faster, and the laundry tripled. But I didn't complain. Back then, both of us were working. Amber had a decent job at a local office. For the first 3 years, we made it work. The bills weren't light, but at least we were splitting things, more or less. I carried a bit more of the weight, sure. But Amber came home one evening and told me she quit her job. Just like that. When I asked her why, she said her job was underpaying her and that she couldn't take working under a jealous, insecure female boss anymore. Now look, I know the workplace can be hard. I know toxic bosses exist. I've had my fair share of them. But something about the way she framed it didn't sit right with me. There was no plan, no job search lined up, no savings talk, nothing. She just wanted out. I didn't argue. Maybe I should have. But I didn't want to be the guy forcing his wife to stay in a job she hated. So I said, all right, if that's your choice, I'll manage. But man, I didn't realize how deep that decision would cut. Because here's the thing. Her sisters, the ones living under our roof, still weren't doing anything either. Not a single one of them had a job. They woke up late, watched TV, scrolled through their phones, ordered takeout, and somehow found money for clothes and hair appointments. Meanwhile, I was dragging myself through long work days just to keep everything from falling apart. I was paying all the utilities, handling every damn expense, and coming home to a living room full of able-bodied adults who didn't think they owed me or the household anything. And it wasn't like they offered. Not once did one of them come up to me and say, "Hey Frank, we know you're carrying this on your back. Let us help out. Let me look for a job. Let me at least handle the groceries this week." Nothing. They just existed in that house like it was their right. And the part that really made me feel alone in all of it, Amber didn't seem to mind. She didn't defend me or push her sisters to step up. She just adapted and joined them. It wore me down slowly. I kept it to myself. Because at that point, I wasn't even sure if talking about it would change anything. But I felt it. Deeply. For 2 years, I carried this load. I don't know how I lasted that long without snapping. I was the only one working, but what really started to eat at me was the silence and lack of acknowledgement of all my efforts. I would come home exhausted, expecting maybe a warm plate of food or even just a little peace. But instead, most evenings, the kitchen was a mess, nothing had been cooked, and Amber's sisters were either bickering among themselves or watching TV like they were on vacation. And Amber never tried to stop the chaos. She'd just disappear into the bedroom while I sat there, trying to figure out what exactly I was working so hard for. When the credit cards maxed out, I dipped into my savings. When the savings dried up, I just kept pushing, hoping the next paycheck would buy me some breathing room. But there was no relief. The longer I kept quiet, the more they believed it was normal. After a while, it started getting to me, not just in the wallet, but in my chest. It was a quiet frustration that built up day after day. I'd lie awake at night, wondering how much longer I could carry this house on my back. It got to the point where I couldn't breathe under the pressure anymore. One morning, after rehearsing what I was going to say a few times in my head, just to make sure it came out calm and respectful, I called a meeting. I love my wife, Amber. I married her knowing she came from a close-knit family, and I had no problem with her sisters staying with us temporarily. But it has been years since their parents' deaths. They didn't leave or contribute to anything. So that morning, as they all sat there in the living room, I finally spoke my mind. I told them, plain and direct, this can't continue. We need to cut back, or I'll stop paying for everything. I was trying to spark a conversation about taking responsibility and pulling together, not tearing anyone down. But the moment the words left my mouth, I could see the energy in the room shift. My wife was annoyed with my statement. Her sisters looked at each other, wide-eyed, and then the emotional backlash came flooding in. I was called controlling, embarrassing, and cold. One of them even asked me if I expected them to start scrubbing floors for rent. Amber jumped in too, acting like I'd humiliated her in front of her family, as if asking grown adults to contribute financially to a home they live in was some kind of betrayal. She said I had shamed her sisters, made them feel unwanted, like they were burdens. The irony was painful. They didn't feel like burdens when they were draining me dry, but now that I'd asked for accountability, suddenly I was the villain. At first, I tried to explain that it wasn't about kicking anyone out. It was about survival, about partnership, about fairness. But they didn't want to hear it. Every word I said was twisted into another accusation. It was like arguing with a wall that kept throwing bricks back at me. Eventually, I stopped. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, gathered my things quietly, and left for work. I thought a day apart would help cool things down, and they'd think it through, realize I wasn't the enemy. But what happened next made it crystal clear where I stood in that house. A month passed after I had that uncomfortable conversation about cutting back on expenses. But nothing changed. Amber still spent like the bills paid themselves. Her sisters were still lounging around, jobless, adding more to the grocery list than the house budget could handle. No one even acknowledged what I said. It was as if they decided, collectively, that I didn't matter, as long as the money kept showing up in the account. I was growing resentful, not just at them, but at myself, for allowing it, for financing my own disrespect. Then the company sent me out of town for a 2-day trip. I was selected to represent our team for a business deal. It wasn't optional. I knew I had to go. Before I packed my bags, I opened my banking app to send some money to the joint account Amber used, like it was her personal allowance. I hovered over the transfer button like I always did before a trip. But this time, I didn't press it. I closed the app. It was a boundary and a quiet statement. I'm not going to keep enabling this. I had simply withheld what was no longer being appreciated. 2 days later, I flew back, worn out from meetings, hotel food, and non-stop negotiation. I just wanted to go home and take a hot bath. I drove up to the house around 8 p.m. My key didn't work in the front door. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired and fumbling. I tried again, and again. Nothing. I walked to the side door, same thing. Then I looked up and noticed lights on in the living room. Someone was definitely home. I knocked. No response. I knocked louder, nothing. Then I called Amber's phone. No answer. I called again, and again, 10 times. I remember the exact number because I could feel my patience draining with each unanswered ring. On the 10th try, she finally picked up. I asked her to open the door. She said, without any shame, "We changed the locks. Your things are outside. You should reflect on your actions." I stood there with my bag still in hand. I looked around, and sure enough, there were my things, a couple of suitcases, a box with some of my shoes, my shaving kit, just thrown on top. I didn't know how to feel. I just stood there, stunned. That was the night something in me shifted. I pulled out my phone immediately and tried calling Amber again. Straight to voicemail. I tried her sisters, every single one of them. Blocked. All of them had shut me out. I didn't want to make a scene, so I sat in my car and just stared at the steering wheel for a long time. Eventually, I called my lawyer. I wasn't even sure what to say at first. I told him everything. He told me to find a hotel for the night and keep my cool. So I did. I checked into a modest place in town. Didn't even bother unpacking. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay on that stiff hotel mattress, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the last 10 years of my life. By sunrise, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I stopped waiting for an apology. I realized that if they could exile me from my own home so easily, they didn't respect me. Not as a husband. Not as a provider. Not as a human being. And that was when I decided, no more being taken for granted. I got on my phone and started making changes. First, I logged into my bank accounts and changed all the login credentials. Every single one. Then I canceled every shared credit card. I wasn't about to keep financing their comfortable little setup. Anything tied to Amber financially, I cut off. Later that morning, I met with my lawyer in person. He brought in 2 more people, one focused on divorce, and the other a real estate attorney. It felt serious now, but I needed that. Since the house was fully in my name, they told me I had every right to file for eviction against Amber's sisters. They had no lease, no legal claim to the property. As far as the law was concerned, they were unauthorized occupants. We started preparing the paperwork immediately. My legal team debated whether to treat it as a formal eviction or a swift removal under property law for non-tenant squatters. But because this involved family and emotions were high, we knew we had to tread carefully. I also asked about getting a temporary order for exclusive use of the house, basically asking the court to grant me sole access while the divorce was being sorted. But the judge denied that, said that unless there was evidence of danger or abuse, Amber had just as much right to remain in the house during the proceedings. That one stung. I just wanted my space back. But the law didn't work that way. So now, I had to play the long game. The locks may have been changed, but my mindset was now locked in too. And this time I wasn't backing down. When the divorce proceedings began, I wasn't bitter. I had reached a point where I no longer needed to scream, argue, or prove anything. The silence was enough. So when the lawyers stepped in, it didn't take long before it was clear to everyone that the house would likely remain mine. I had all the evidence showing I was the one keeping that roof over everyone's head. And that's when she started changing her tone. Suddenly, the coldness she once threw at me turned into warmth. She started calling me by my pet name again, asking how I was doing, offering to cook, and trying to strike up conversations that didn't happen before. It was awkward, honestly, like watching someone flip a switch and forget you saw the wires hanging. But I didn't buy into it. I had already reflected. I had already processed the hurt, the betrayal, the fact that she and her sisters felt bold enough to lock me out of my own house and toss my things out like I was some stranger. No amount of soft words was going to erase that. The marriage officially ended not long after. The judge ruled, and the house stayed with me, mainly because the financial contributions were in black and white. There was no argument there. But after everything wrapped up, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It was too big, too full of memories that no longer served me. So I made a choice to put the house on the market. I sold it months later and walked away. With the money, I rented a smaller place that fit just me. Amber got a settlement from the divorce. The court made sure of that. I gave what was due. But within a few months, that money ran out. I heard through a mutual acquaintance. Maybe poor planning. Maybe the lifestyle caught up. Maybe she thought the money would last forever. I didn't ask. It wasn't my place anymore. I had reflected as she told me, and I had moved on. It had been almost a year since the divorce papers were finalized. I hadn't heard from Amber in all that time, and honestly, I wasn't expecting to. We'd gone our separate ways. I had spent that year quietly rebuilding, piece by piece. I finally had room to breathe without walking on eggshells every day. Then one afternoon, I got a message from Amber. It was short, straight to the point. She said she wanted to talk. A part of me hesitated, not out of anger, but because I wasn't sure what there was left to say. But curiosity won, and I called her back. She didn't beat around the bush. She said she had gotten a job after everything fell apart, but that it barely covered her rent and food. She wasn't calling to ask for money, not directly, at least, but you could hear the weight in her voice. She finally felt what I had carried for years. I just said, "Now you understand." She had never respected the effort it took to hold a home together. Knowing that she wasn't calling for anything serious, I hung up that call. I was no longer stuck in a house where my value was tied to what I could pay for. Thank you for watching.